What are some mysteries that have actually been solved? Story 1. The mysterious trails of rocks at Racetrack Playa in Death Valley National Park, California. For many years, the cause of these mysterious rock movements was unknown. However, in recent years, scientists have discovered that the rocks move due to a combination of wind and ice. During periods of rain or melting snow, water freezes into thin sheets of ice on the surface of the lake bed. When the ice breaks apart, it can be moved by wind, and as the ice sheets move, they push the rocks along with them, leaving behind the distinctive trails. Story 2. The Solway Firth spaceman became popular in ufology, as it supposedly showed a mysterious figure in the background. For 50 years, no one quite knew what it really was until someone analyzed the photo and concluded it was actually the mother who accidentally walked into the photo. The reason she looked like a spaceman was because of overexposure. What's most interesting about this was that it was super obvious when you saw all the other photos taken that day. I think there's one literally a few seconds before or after the spaceman pic, with the mother standing in almost the same spot. Story 3. The Lady of the Dunes was an unidentified woman who had been murdered and left in the dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. What made her murder unique, besides being a cold case for years, was one theory about who she was. Stephen King's son noticed a woman in the movie Jaws that looked identical to the Lady of the Dunes, and Jaws was filmed near the area too. However, she has recently been identified as Ruth Marie Terry. They believe her husband murdered her as he had a criminal record with his past wives beforehand. Story 4. Most investigators agree that a Compton-based Crip named Orlando Baby Lane Anderson was the one who killed Tupac, as there was tension between the two, because either Orlando or one of his boys stole a chain from Pac's label Death Row earlier in the year, resulting in Pac beating the crap out of him earlier that night, which led Babyland to kill Pac as a sort of way to revenge. Baby Lane was never formally charged, because he was murdered in his own right not long after the fact. I think one of the main reasons why people are in denial about this is because people don't want to admit that such an important person died for such a stupid reason. Story 5. That stranded cosmonaut recording is 99% likely to be a hoax. Many have discredited if the brothers' technology was even capable of picking up the signal of a cosmonaut who's drifted off course. But the real smoking gun is that the woman in the audio recording is speaking in broken Russian, and the two brothers who picked up the signal had a sister who is currently learning Russian, which would explain the limited vocabulary and pronunciation issues that skeptics have pointed out. Story 6. The two ships of the lost Franklin expedition of 1845 were both found in the last decade sunk in the Northwest Passage, northern Canada. The mystery of what happened to the crew, 126 men I think, has been speculated upon with plenty of solid theories, but very few remains have been found. The ships are still being examined and may contain more clues. I just recently read a great book about that. Researchers determined lead poisoning from the new technology of canned food was a huge factor in some of the poor decisions and health of the crew. Inuits told stories of the coldest winters they had ever experienced, and no game could be found to hunt. They believed the white men brought a curse on the land. They also told disturbing stories about groups of white men from the expedition turning on one another and resorting to cannibalism as they starved. This was, of course, denied by the British government for over 100 years. But then remains of the former crew were eventually found, which showed clear evidence of cannibalism. If you want to see something morbidly interesting, look up Franklin Expedition frozen corpses on the internet. There were 3 bodies perfectly preserved of men buried early on. Their identities and how they died have been matched to records. Story 7. The miraculous staircase in the Loreto Chapel in Santa Fe, New Mexico. There was even a movie made about it starring Barbara Hershey. One of the myths is that it stands miraculously without a center support pole, and no engineer can figure out how that's possible. The center stringer is tightly wrapped with only 8 diameter. It acts as the center pole. Nuns said a 9-day novena for a much-needed staircase. A woodworker miraculously showed up from nowhere and built the staircase. It must have been St. Joseph. The staircase was ordered from France. The manufacturer sent a guy to put it together. It's made of wood found nowhere in the area. It's a miracle, because the wood is from France. Duh. And finally, the guy who built it stayed in Santa Fe afterward. The local newspaper had his obituary, 1896 or 1898, and even said he was the man who built the staircase. Story 8. Spontaneous generation. People used to think flies would spontaneously appear from rotten meat, as every time they had it, flies somehow would appear even though flies were nowhere close when the meat was okay. After observation and experiments, we understood flies landed in the meat, left their eggs, and then more flies would be born, and then stay to eat the meat. I actually learned how Louis Pasteur figured out it was false in science class a few years ago. First, he set up 3 swan-necked beakers and placed a small piece of meat in each. Then he poured water in one of them, so that the water stayed in the dip, but didn't touch the meat, so that nothing got in or out. He placed a bit of wool in the dip in another beaker, so that air can pass through, but not solids can, and he left another one empty. After a few days, Pasteur checked up on these again, and found maggots on the meat that was exposed to solids, and it was rotting as well. The meat only exposed to air was rotten, but no maggots, and the meat not exposed to anything wasn't infested, nor rotten. Still wouldn't be fresh, though. Thus, Pasteur was able to prove that spontaneous generation was indeed false. Story 9. No one knew how the islanders of Easter Island moved their giant heads from one place to another. When asked how they did it, the islanders said they walked them. This sounded impossible and silly to Europeans, so they ignored it. But a team of archaeologists and native islanders a few years back made their own Easter Island head, tied 4 big ropes around it, then had a dozen guys on each rope pull the head side to side. It rocked corner to corner, causing it to walk forward down the road, so definitely not aliens. Story 10. Not a worldwide mystery, but a mystery amongst my mom's side of the family. When my mom was little, like 13 years old, she was so close, until now, with her cousins that they all played together almost every day in their grandma's house, and that house is a second-story house. So here's how the mystery started. My mom, her siblings, and her male cousins played with a ball, and the ball went upstairs and into the only room that the stairs went to. But then the door suddenly went open, and the ball bounced down the stairs. There was a moment of silence, and then they all ran to their grandma saying that there's a ghost. So their grandma comforted them and told the maid to check on it, and then she found no one there. A few weeks after that incident, they never went up to that room, and then they started to forget about it. Many years later, 2 months ago, my whole family went to my mom's hometown, and she spent time with her brothers and female cousin of hers to go to the cemetery to visit Grandpa. As we were going, my mom remembered that story and started talking about it. Then my mom said, "We never really knew who threw the ball back, haha." And then her cousin said, "That was me." So my mom, her brothers, and her cousin all laughed because the mystery was finally solved. Sadly, her cousin passed away 2 months ago. She revealed the mystery before she died of breast cancer. May she rest in peace. Story 11. How the pyramids were built. For some reason, people still keep saying we don't know. Well, we do. It boils down to math plus money plus grunt work. The core workers and project leaders were professionals, and some slaves, likely not thousands and thousands, as previously assumed, were used for labor. It's also known that low-wage workers were used as well. That's it. It's not magic. And it's insulting to ancient people to claim that they couldn't have had any sort of mathematical accuracy or the ability to build with precise lines. Of course they could do that. They had ropes and pulleys and understood leverage and design. They knew what tools to use. They had artisans and engineers. One thing that always impresses me about ancient civilizations is just how much travel and trade took place. Sure, it took longer than today, but damn, people who were industrial didn't just stay at home in their cave or hut. Viking swords have been found that were made of Damascus steel. The Silk Road was incredibly important for both Asia and Europe, and more. Story 12. Roanoke. It's not hard to connect the dots, the nearby indigenous tribe's name being carved into a tree, and witness accounts in later years of their people being born with blondish hair and blue eyes. After returning from England, John White didn't search for the lost colonists really any farther inland than the colony due to rough seas and a lost anchor. He had to return to England. It's likely that if he had followed the name carved on the post, Croatoan, he would have found a number of colonists still alive and well, either living with or being helped by natives. Another possible theory is that they were killed by said indigenous group, but there is little archaeological evidence for that or any type of attack. Regardless, it's almost certainly one of these two theories. Story 13. Haven't seen this, and since I'm so late to the party, it'll probably not be widely seen. But the mythical creature known as the chupacabra has been identified as a wolf or coyote crossbreed. Location of major sightings was found to be basically a no man's land between wolf pack territory and coyote pack territory. Most likely, an outcast from each species met in the middle and had a messed up baby. Since the genetics were kind of messed up, they would typically have mange, causing it to have little to no fur. It could also have the jaw of a wolf, but the mouth of a coyote, causing the creepy and unique look of having its front teeth awkwardly stick out, which is just caused by its teeth being too big for its mouth. Things actually do look pretty wicked. You can find videos of them on YouTube, and some of the tamer pics of people catching and killing them you might find on creepy posts or videos could actually be real. It would hunt livestock, like cows and sheep, as their easy prey with being caged up and all, but the part about it being a bloodsucker was just folklore. Story 14. The mystery of how the far side of the moon actually looks. Until the late 1950s, little was known about the far side of the moon. Librations periodically allowed limited glimpses of features near the lunar limb on the far side, but only up to 59% of the total surface of the moon. Before space exploration began, Astronomers did not expect that the far side would be different from the side visible to Earth. On 7 October 1959, the Soviet probe Luna 3 took the first photographs of the lunar far side, 18 of them resolvable, covering one-third of the surface invisible from the Earth. Story 15. Elisa Lam's death at the Cecil Hotel in LA. Her body was found in the rooftop water tanks in 2013 after guests complained of low water pressure and a black foul smell of water coming from the faucets. The water tank doors were locked, as were the doors to the rooftop. Her final moments alive were captured on a malfunctioning elevator's CCTV. She's seen repeatedly pressing buttons, hiding in the corner, peeking out into the hallway, and making strange motions with her hands. She appeared to either be speaking to someone or hiding from them. The Cecil Hotel is haunted and paranormal activity could have been at play, except none of that is true. Story 16. What Area 51, or Edwards Air Force Base, is hiding. There are no aliens or anything like that. It's literally just a base for testing prototype aircraft and avionics tech, like the new stealth bomber the US has revealed. They're secretive and have high security because it's a military installation that does prototype testing. And these are things you want to keep secret. The military has been secretive this way for centuries. Do people really think they'd be able to hide aliens? Even if they somehow learn to communicate, quarantine the aliens from our diseases. Remember how the Native Americans were almost wiped out from existence by smallpox. Figure out what the aliens need to eat and hide the alien spacecraft. Surely one alien would have escaped by now. We humans would try to escape if we were being held by aliens. Story 17. Maybe 40 years ago, I read a book on strange disappearances. One of the stories was about a Avro Lancastrian, a commercial version of the wartime bomber the Lancaster. It was flying from Buenos Aires to Santiago in 1947 when it simply disappeared. Loads of theories, up to and including alien abductions. Cut to 1998, and parts of the plane arrived at the base of a glacier. Basically, the aircraft flew into the top of a mountain, was instantly covered in snow and ice so invisible in the search, then it spent 50 years drifting with the glacier before being seen. Theory was that it was flying into the jet stream, a phenomenon virtually unknown then. This reduced its airspeed considerably, and the rudimentary navigation suggested that they'd cleared the mountain and started their descent, a fatal error. Story 18. Over the years, many mysteries that used to baffle people have been solved. Let's check out some of these cool cases. The Rosetta Stone. When this stone slab was found in 1799, it was a total game changer. It had a message written in 3 different scripts: ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Demotic script. By figuring out these scripts, especially the hieroglyphics, we got a way better understanding of ancient Egyptian culture and history. The lost city of Machu Picchu. This amazing Inca site, hidden high up in the Andes Mountains, was stumbled upon by an explorer named Hiram Bingham in 1911. Since then, people have been studying and documenting the city, learning loads about the Inca civilization. The Titanic's fate? For a long time, nobody knew exactly where the Titanic had ended up after it sank in 1912. That was until Robert Ballard discovered the wreckage in 1985. Now, we've learned a lot about the disaster and the people who were on the ship. The Mary Celeste mystery. Back in 1872, the Mary Celeste was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean with no crew on board. People came up with all sorts of theories, like pirates or storms. But nowadays, we think an explosion of alcohol fumes in the ship's hold probably made the crew jump ship. They most likely didn't survive at sea. Richard III's remains. King Richard III of England died in battle in 1485, and nobody knew where he was buried. But in 2012, they found his remains under a parking lot in Leicester, England. DNA testing proved it was him, solving the mystery of his final resting place. Otzi the Iceman. In 1991, a super well-preserved mummy from the Copper Age was found in the Otzal Alps between Austria and Italy. Nicknamed Otzi, this 300-year-old dude has taught us a lot about how people lived back then, like what they ate, how they dressed, and the tools they used. The Antikythera mechanism. This ancient Greek artifact, found in 1901, is a crazy complex device that was used for calculating astronomical stuff. After a ton of research, we now know what it was for and how it was used, which is pretty awesome considering how advanced the ancient Greeks were. Story 19. A couple of popular mysteries have really simple explanations. D.B. Cooper died in the fall. He dove at night in a storm in open wilderness with a defective parachute. The lead mass deaths were 2 guys who poisoned themselves thinking that aliens would pick up their souls, when in reality someone was stringing them along, most likely to rob them. The Tamam Shud case wasn't a spy killing, but the suicide of a very lonely man who was rejected by a woman he was having an affair with. She lied about knowing him because she thought her son could have been his, and it seemed likely, because they both had rare genetics. But it turned out they weren't related. A lot of UFO sightings, especially post-World War II, were experimental spycraft. and the idea that they're aliens is intentional misinformation by the government. It's in their best interest to throw conspiracy theorists off their trail. The Dyatlov Pass incident wasn't aliens or secret government testing or anything supernatural. It was probably a small avalanche. Even a few feet of sliding snow is ungodly strong. Or katabatic winds. The radiation on their clothes probably came from the thorium lanterns they had. Those who were found in their underwear probably suffered from paradoxical undressing, a sign of hypothermia. Those found buried under many feet of snow were probably trying to construct a shelter under the snow when it collapsed on them, one accidentally biting her own tongue off while she was being crushed. Story 20. There have been many mysteries throughout history that have been solved through scientific inquiry, historical research, and investigative work. Here are some examples. The identity of Jack the Ripper. After a series of gruesome murders in London in 1888, the killer who came to be known as Jack the Ripper remained unidentified for over a century. In 2019, scientists used DNA evidence to identify Aaron Kosminski as the most likely suspect. The fate of the Franklin expedition. In 1845, the British Navy sent two ships, the Erebus and the Terror, to explore the Arctic. Both ships and all crew members were lost. In 2014, the wreck of the Erebus was discovered, and in 2016, the wreck of the Terror was found, revealing evidence of how the crew perished. The origins of the universe. For centuries, the origin of the universe was a mystery. However, through the study of physics and cosmology, scientists have developed the Big Bang Theory, which suggests that the universe began as a singularity and has been expanding ever since. The identity of the Zodiac Killer. From 1968 to 1969, the Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California with a series of murders and cryptic messages. While the killer's true identity has never been conclusively proven, in 2020, a team of codebreakers claimed to have cracked one of the Zodiac ciphers, potentially revealing new information about the killer. The cause of the 1918 flu pandemic. The 1918 flu pandemic killed millions of people worldwide, but the cause of the outbreak remained a mystery for decades. In 2005, scientists used tissue samples from a victim buried in permafrost to isolate the virus responsible for the pandemic, which was found to be an H1N1 strain of influenza. Story 21. The history of ships named to be unsinkable, only to sink, confounds me. Maybe it's a sign not to give the title of unsinkable. The mystery of the Franklin's lost expedition. How the most advanced expedition of its time failed, and after many years of questions, finding bodies, exhuming them, finding the Terror in Terror Bay, and diving into the testimonies of the Inuit people, that had been struck and seen as slander by the English, in turn leading the Inuit to be called the slur Eskimos fish-eaters, from then on even to modern day, came to understand the expedition not only faced unnatural weather, but a series of bad luck and even bad judgment and bad preparation, even before the two ships left port. Yes, the expedition may have been doomed from the start, despite it being equal to man landing on the moon at the time. The two ships were former warships outfitted to be able to weather the ice. Both ships had coal steam engines, but these engines were former train engines not meant for the big ships, and they served as emergency propulsion with only 12 days' worth of coal. These engines were just several ton paperweights. The ships were supplied with canned food, but the supplier was the cheapest the government could find to save money. As a result, the cans were canned improperly and majorly of the food spoiled. Plus, the cans contained huge amounts of lead. This would poison majority of the men, only adding to their torture. The weather would prove to be unlike anything ever recorded. According to ice samples, the northern ice experienced an unusually long freezing period where under normal conditions it would melt. They got locked in ice for 2 years. Add scurvy into the mix, then Franklin himself died. There's much more in regards to this horror story of an expedition, and I hope I lit curiosity for you to go find out more about this tale. The TV series that covers it is historically accurate up till it is not, and you'd spot it immediately. But I'd still suggest it. Story 22. In the very beginning of 2023, scientists finally reverse-engineered Roman concrete and discovered how the Romans were able to make it so strong. In addition to using seawater instead of regular water, they added a type of mineral called quicklime. When mixed with seawater, quicklime creates an exothermic reaction, causing chunks of quicklime to be distributed throughout the concrete. This essentially creates self-healing concrete. When it cracks, water trickles in and activates those chunks of quicklime, thus filling the gaps caused by the cracks and repairing the concrete. Story 23. The Voynich manuscript. For the longest time, nobody had any idea what language it was written in, with some people insisting it must be a hoax because the script didn't fit any known language. But the guys who came to this conclusion simply weren't aware of enough languages. A Turkish team examining the Voynich manuscript found that the pattern of the glyphs seemed to be consistent with Turkic grammar, and using various methods of reconstructing the language from the vocabularies and word roots used in various Turkic languages, they appear to have decoded the Voynich manuscript. Unfortunately, their work was rejected from academic philology journals, which is a shame because it really looks like they figured it out. The language it was written in appears to be in the Turkic family of languages. Story 24. The lost colony of Roanoke has enough circumstantial evidence not to be much of a mystery anymore. There is an ash layer in the soil regime of the area indicating that a large forest fire took place around when the colony was founded, window of 30 plus years, so definitely not a perfect estimate. Also, because of shifting coastlines, several parts of the original colony were underwater when searches for the colony's ruins ramped up in the 20th century. And lastly, several natives of the area, living into the 20th century, were discovered to have some genetic phenotypes, such as blue eyes, dating back hundreds of years. So what almost certainly happened to the lost colony of Roanoke between 1585 and 1590? A forest fire wiped out most or all of the colony. The survivors mingled with the local native population, and evidence was scarce or absent during 20th century searches, because most of its original location was underwater by then. Story 25. There is little mystery surrounding the moai of Easter Island. We know who carved them, when, why, and how. We even know a lot of their names. Yes, each one has its own name, just like statues of people elsewhere. We know why most of the completed ones were toppled, and we have known since 1722 that they were all full sculptures from the waist up, not just heads. Only a small portion were buried up to the chest or neck by erosion, but for some reason those have become the most famous. There are endless photos available online of the full carvings. There have been etchings and sketches of the full carvings in circulation since the 1780s. The only thing we don't know for sure was how they were moved. Story 26. We moved from Georgia to Maryland to a community on a river off the Chesapeake Bay. Our house was up the road from one of the community docks, so when we got settled, we all walked down as a family. My younger brother, 10, had an odd look on his face. When asked what was wrong, he said, "I've been here before." My parents asked what he meant. He said, "I don't know how, but I've been here before." A bit more dialogue and nothing came of it. Life went on. 6 months later, for Christmas, I asked for a boat. Parents got me a very small sportiac, nothing special but a boat. As expected, I wanted to go out on it, walked it down, put it in, and rowed out. Got to the other side of the creek and my brother yells, "I know why I've been here before. Go back." We're all thinking of some Twilight Zone, living another life as a cabin boy episode. He said, "Mom, remember when we lived in Virginia and friend took me to the river with his family? That was 3 years earlier. Turns out he went to the small yacht club that was across the river. Didn't recognize the club right off due to different angles and young brains, and didn't recognize the other side where we lived until he saw it from the same angle. Not a huge mystery, but a mystery nonetheless."